Our next panel focuses on the underpinning of our industry, data. The panel will examine how data is being used to drive innovation and resilience. We'll hear how data is being cultivated to better define and mitigate risks, resulting in expanded protection for our customers. In a time of extreme volatility, data provides actionable guidance that will lead us forward towards greater sustainability. I'll now turn it over to futurist Chunka Moy and our panel of experts.
Hi, my name is Chunka Moy. I'm a futurist and innovation advisor, and I have the pleasure of leading this very distinguished panel. So in this era of very dramatic change across the world and in the insurance industry, there's one constant, and it's an ever-growing constant, which is that data is critical to the industry, to both the operation and the performance of the industry. So this panel is going to be focused on this very important issue, looking at data, the emerging trends in data, and the issues that we have in terms of effectively utilizing data, but not only in the context of insurance, but in the larger context of sustainability and ESG. So with that, I'd like to jump into this discussion by inviting each of my panelists to spend maybe about 30 seconds introducing themselves, their roles and their companies. George, can I start with you?
Sure, and very, very happy to be with you here today and part of this panel. I'm George Kesselman. I'm a Chief Commercial Officer at Zhonggang Tech. And my background has been primarily all around Asia. And my nights and evenings job is I run an InsurTech ecosystem around Asia for about 7 years called InsurTech Asia Association. So combining this, my day job, which is very much deep into the back end and transformation of the digitalization of insurance, with my other perspective, which is much broader lens in terms of what's happening in the wider ecosystem. Very happy to be with you here to bring this perspective into the panel.
Great, thank you, George. Peter.
Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Pete Animus. I am the founder and CEO of Dakadu. We are building a global platform for health scoring. And, like George was talking about his night hours, my night hours are based on innovation around AI and basically making the world a more sustainable place. So before Dakadu, which I founded 11 years ago, I founded Asset4, which became one of the world's leading sustainability rating companies. So I think that's very relevant for today's discussion.
Great. Thank you, Peter. James.
Well, thank you, Chunka. James Maudsley. I work for Equinix, the world digital infrastructure company, where I fulfill primarily the role of being the global digital lead for insurance. I am an insurer, but for the last 10 years or so, I've been at Equinix. And essentially, our role as we see it is to bring together digitally all aspects of the insurance market so that they can interconnect with each other, so that they can exchange data and do so in an efficient and actually now really increasingly sustainable manner.
Great, thank you, James. And given that your role looking globally across the industry, James, I thought I would start with you and the first question, and just tell us from your perspective that sort of you see the key emerging issues in terms of the effective use of data in insurance at the moment.
Well, I think, Chunka, this really starts from the point that for insurance companies, data is their gold. It is the foundation upon which really all insurance decision making is made. Insurance is, of course, a non-physical product, and therefore, without data, it would really struggle to exist. And what we are seeing, as so many people are, is that data, of course, has multiple and growing sources, and I'll come back to that in a moment. For many years now, insurers have also had to face down the fact that data comes in a couple of forms, structured and unstructured, and they've had to find ways of using both types. But of course, on top of that, and on the what I might call the threat side, if that's the right word, we also see cyber threats increasing in nature. Now we see regulatory implications. Okay, really sort of coming to bear across the world. Things like GDPR spring to mind, and yet. On top of all that, we have to cope with things like the Internet of Things, IoT. We have to cope with new forms of analysis, such as AI, machine learning, and so on. And then, as a final point, really, we also have to look at the total cost of all this and what does it mean to insurers. And I think, from our perspective at Equinix, what we're seeing is that this task has become or will become so big that it is impossible for one type of organization to actually sort of really succeed in it without addressing an entire ecosystem of other participants who will bring data to them, who will help them analyze data, who will help to process the vast quantities of data that are flowing today and will increase in the future. And I suppose really from an Equinix perspective, what that sort of brings us to is the point where fundamentally we believe that digital interconnection, private digital interconnection, is going to be ultimately where the industry ends up, where it can acquire all these different types of data from an ecosystem of participants, where it can bring them together in a core, if you like, and where it can use them to its best effect.
I wonder, Peter, if I could ask you to respond to that, because your company is both using data in tremendously innovative and aspirational ways, but at the same time, you're facing many of these complexities that James talked about.
Absolutely. And I was giving a speech the other day for the Swiss Doctor Association. And of course, some doctors will say, I'm against digitalization. I want to spend more time with the patient. Why am I going down that road? Because I just want to give a very concrete example on how sustainability can actually, or how computer science can provide sustainability to the insurance world. As an example, 2 years ago, real life example, I had an accident skiing and I broke an arm and a leg and a hand. And I had to go to 5 different specialists. They all took their own images. They all created their own electronic medical records, etc., as we had no standard. So what I'm getting at is you had the same working procedure taking place 5 to 7 times, stored, etc. So that's, of course, on one hand side, very expensive for the insurance operators, and on the other hand side, not at all sustainable. So what we have started looking at into, at Dakadu is we, of course, collect data from all the global healthcare systems, insurance operators, and provides, as you know, the health score, which is becoming a global proxy of health. Why do I mention this? Because when we look at the FHIR format, which is the new digital format of health data, as an example, this is the first time ever the whole world, including Google and Apple, which can never agree on anything, have agreed on a standard format of information. So this means in the future, calculating risk, creating electronic medical records, etc. I call it store once, distribute across multiple part systems of the ecosystem. And this, of course, will provide a lot higher level of efficiency, lower cost, and at the end of the day, a happy consumer or patient, because you don't have to go and do the same working process 5 times. So when a doctor says, I don't want to be digital, or they say they don't want to, how I started my story, I actually think they're shooting themselves in the knee. And when you look at the healthcare system today, it's about 70%, 70, that is used on administration of the healthcare system. In the insurance, we know today from companies such as Accenture and McKinsey, etc., that the underwriter actually spends around 60 to 80% documenting the data flow. So there is huge space for sustainability and process improvement in the overall insurance industry and in the overall global life and health insurance industry.
Peter, if I might, But in the course of doing that, you're facing some of the sort of increasing complexities in security, in regulatory response that James talked about. How are you dealing with that across so many different geographies?
That's a very, very good question. And as you know, there are countries where you are not allowed to move any data. And there are many countries that have these kind of security parameters. So I think number one is encryption is getting more and more advanced. So at least with our experience, I think on the data security side, we will only get better. We will only learn more. We will only improve more. So on the overall regulatory space, I think GDPR is a good thing. I know many people think it's a bad thing. I actually think it's a good thing because it creates an operational environment for entrepreneurs like myself to build successful companies. So I always said where there are standards that work, there is success. So very shortly said, the CDMA/GSM created the mobile economy, HTML created the internet, and FHIR will, the health format will create the digital health. So regulation is good. It creates trust on the consumer side, as long as it's not over-regulation, of course. But I'm actually very, very positive. And this $8 trillion life and health insurance industry will go through the same digital transformation that we have seen in travel, that we have seen in banking, that we have seen in entertainment. And this will be driven by the standards that James just mentioned before.
Right. And George, a lot of that change is happening in Asia. I know your focus is on Asia, but your perspective is globally. I wonder if you could respond to some of these issues raised in the context of your focus on use of data in the ecosystem.
I think it's a very good points that have been raised, and I always, when we talk about data, I always kind of come back to this funny conversation that I had with the insurer a year or so ago, where we sat down and we started talking about data, and about 10 minutes into the conversation, we kind of realized that we're talking about completely different things. So when they said, we have a lot of data, and I said, so what kind of data do you have? And the response was, we have mobile numbers, we have emails, and we have names and date of births. So their idea of data was, I think, fairly rudimentary in that sense, where, what we're looking at now in terms of data is a lot more unstructured data, a lot more metadata that's coming in to actually start to drive a lot of product innovation. And I think this is where things are getting a lot more exciting, because the embedded space in Asia is really taking off when it comes to the insurance, and the premiums for that are tiny, and you kind of have to be a lot more accurate when it comes to pricing, taking the right parameters in, because very quickly either the products don't work or the products the pricing kind of gets skewed. So what we're seeing is that data is definitely an important enabler for this kind of a product innovation. And the point was made earlier about the ecosystems and how they play a very critical role in providing that data synchronization is definitely very, very true in Asia, because the digital ecosystems have been growing very rapidly in the last 3-4 years, especially. And created a tremendous amount of data on the back of that. And I think right now we're still just looking at the tip of the iceberg of the data and accessing it for the insurance purposes. My one point to kind of also show that Asia is very non-homogeneous in a way is that, for example, markets like China, due to a little bit more relaxed approach to data privacy in the beginning, allowed a lot more innovation before they kind of now started to take a much more serious approach about the data privacy. But during that period of kind of a much more relaxed approach, it provided that flexibility to create new types of products. And one of the things that I take as a really cool kind of example about how much data is just flowing through the Chinese insurance ecosystem. Zhongang, which is the biggest online insurer now in China and probably globally, they gets a very staggering number of pings from different ecosystems. So when I checked last, I think they were getting something in the order of about 13 billion API calls with data coming in from all kinds of digital ecosystems, saying somebody is about to take a ride in the car, somebody is about to buy something, or somebody is ordering food. Which kind of propositions do you want to insert there? And then as privacy gets more and more strict in China, the actual personal identifiers are very limited in it, and you kind of have more of a moments and snapshots in time type of data. So this is a very interesting trend, and I think this is something that we can unpack a little bit more during the conversation today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd like to actually address that a little bit now, because one of the things that's really interesting is your company works both with insurers, traditional insurers, but also these new platforms. And so it's almost like an arms race in terms of who can use the data better. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, so I think we do have a very interesting perspective, because in China, we're an insurer. Outside of China, we work as an enabler both for the digital platforms. We have a JV with one of the biggest ride-sharing platforms here called Grab, that's built in a super app. And then on the same time, we work with a lot of big insurers as well. So in terms of the arm race, I'm not sure if that's the analogy that comes to mind. It feels like there's a little bit of a slow going for the insurers out of the gates now, at least in kind of outside of China, because it feels like there's a little bit less pressure to innovate in terms of the use of data for a time being. So we're kind of ready to do a lot more. And so are ecosystems and insurers, I think, just starting to gear up for more taking of that data to price products properly, to innovate on the product side as well.
So maybe that's a good segue to sort of the next major theme I want to address, which is sustainability, and how issues of sustainability impact the kind of innovations you're pursuing. As you look at all these great opportunities.
In terms of sustainability, it has been a bigger topic for the kind of insurance boards and insurers here. Although I have to say that in terms of kind of priority queue, it hasn't really translated very strongly into the actual products that are being manufactured. I think maybe in that sense, that Asia is lagging behind other places where it is probably more advanced when it comes to the sustainability discussions and kind of how to actually translate to the product. So right now, we're just starting on that path. And for example, the regulator here in Singapore is taking a very proactive approach to create this hub of sustainability and green financing and green insurance. But in terms of the actual outcomes, I think we haven't really seen that translate yet into the actual outcomes.
And Peter, maybe I can come to you with that same question, but from a different perspective. George talked a little about focus on carbon footprint and sustainability from that standpoint, but especially in the healthcare arena, an aspect of sustainability, and you touched on this earlier, is ethics. How do we ethically use this information? Could you talk a little bit about how you're sort of navigating those?
Yeah. Actually, together with the IIS, we have worked, closely around what we call #WeCare. I think very deep in the roots of insurance is that you actually want to care for me and look after me in my most difficult moments in my life. So what we did during COVID was we came up with the initiative #WeCare, and really trying to help the insurance operators, showing their clients how much they care about the well-being and the health of their clients. And to put it into perspective, last week was the World Heart Day, by the WHO, and they published research where they said then globally now 74% of all people are dying of chronic diseases. And that doesn't need to be. As we all know, chronic diseases are, based on your lifestyle and choices you make. Some people might take those choices because they want to, but many people, as we know today, are taking these choices because of lack of information or understanding of the consequences. So to come back to where I started today in sustainability, I think sustainability is all about efficiency. So why did I create Asset 4, which was a sustainability rating company? Because I wanted for my 5 children to look after this beautiful world. And I think when we looked at the companies, we were seeing at that time companies that were producing exactly the same product, using 60% less energy, or using 40% less water. So at the end of the day, that's going to be the same in insurance. So if I look after you, you are less sick. If I look after you, you feel better. If I look after you, you actually live longer. So I have a client which is longer and more sustainable. So I think there is a heck of a inefficiency and overlapping of resources, both in insurance, and I know they're my clients, and in the whole way we live and issue health services. So to come back to what George said before, I think it's all about microservices. I think it's about understanding where I am. And as you know, what I can understand, I can predict and I can prevent. And for me, insurance should not just be, and don't get me wrong, a stupid cash cow that just pays out money all the time. And insurance should add value to society. And insurance should have an intelligence in its data sample, which is around predicting and preventing. Because if I get diabetes, guess what? The next 40 years, I will need insulin. I will have a, less quality of life as a consumer, and it will cost my health insurance a lot of money. So everybody wins in a sustainable world where the insurance take a proactive service, deliver these microservices that George was talking about before.
But James, all this capability is going to cost a lot. Are we sort of building capabilities that we can actually pay for?
Well, I think really the way to look at this, Chunka, is that as George and Peter have just said, the use of services, microservices, the use of ecosystems is becoming fundamental to delivering all of this. Now, if we think briefly about Peter's example of his skiing accident, if a situation had existed where at the initial point of medical contact, some photographs have been taken, some initial analysis done, and those had been shared out into an ecosystem where subsequent medical intervention could simply draw down on them. What's that done? It's made things more efficient. It's made things faster. It's used less resources, as part of that whole thing. So I think as far as obviously becoming more expensive, clearly there are going to be more services available. That's going to cost money. But what about the saving in time? What about the savings in processing capability? At Equinix, we will always say to people that, frankly, if you have a machine room in your office, you can do it more sustainably in a third-party data center where services are designed from the ground up to be partly sustainable. So we would always make that point. So really, if you look at a situation where you have an ecosystem, where you digitally interconnect to each other, that surely is a more sustainable thing. But I have one final thing, and that is to say that part of this is about being in the right places, where you need to be as a business. Peter's point about regulation from earlier on, different sort of regulatory environments wherever you are. So being in the right place, having access to the right partners, the right members of your ecosystem, and surely that means that then you have an enormous range of possibilities too, hopefully all on a highly sustainable basis.
Yeah, George, from your perspective in Asia and how the ecosystem is developing there, what are your thoughts about sort of this cost issue and sustainability issue?
I think in terms of the cost, it feels like the approach here is a lot more ground up. So rather than thinking about like a kind of massive build out and massive investment at the start, it is very much like more of a startup. Let's try building a small pieces out, integrating bits and pieces of data to start to build it in that sense. So I don't think in terms of the cost and the effort that has been big driver. I think the mindset is something that is going through a bit of a shift, because as these ecosystems have developed, they became much, much larger. And I think the insurers are still trying to go through a little bit of an adjustment to understand that the world is not rotating around the insurance. It is not a center of the universe. I think for data perspective, the platforms and ecosystems are becoming a lot more central to that. And the insurers are kind of having to go through the transition to really get up to more of an understanding that, okay, I cannot ask for all the data, for example, from you, and the customers are owned a lot of the times by these platforms in the ecosystems. So it is very much about finding the win-win situations where the products can be provided in a seamless way to the ecosystems. For example, using a relevant parts of data, but it's not to say that it's going to lead to necessarily a cross sell and ownership transfer as well.
Right. I want to transition. This is a great way of transitioning to the use of data and how the insurance industry can lead in this great reset, as the larger theme of this conference tries to address. And Peter, I think your company is a great example of that, because you talked a little bit about sort of the personal impact of chronic disease, but also there's a tremendous societal cost and impact chronic disease. I've read statistics that as much as 80% of healthcare spend is due to late stages of chronic disease, whereas in many cases, as you've talked about, we can manage them or even prevent them if we address them earlier. So in that way, you're helping the health insurance industry lead this great reset and driving down costs of healthcare and quality of life. But that's a tremendously complex undertaking. You have to both encourage your clients, insurers, to take advantage of this data. You actually talked about earlier, you have to deal with regulators and all this complex. And ultimately, you have to get consumers and to change behavior, to take advantage of this. But it is a tremendous example of how the insurance industry can lead on a larger global issue. So I want to invite you just to talk a little bit about the complexity of creating that change, creating that leadership position.
Yeah, no, that's one of my favorite topics. So you're touching on a very important issue, because when an insurer sits and they have a board meeting, and I happen to be invited once in a while to present to insurance boards, they're like, what is the ROI on looking after my client? And if you haven't done, I strongly suggest that you look at the latest paper from WHO. WHO and The Economist, actually, together with Cigna, they talk about between 300 to 1100%, ROI on prevention, looking after people, etc. So I think what we need to do is to kind of reset the basic understanding of what is good and what is not good for my business. And let me give you a very concrete example. Life tables are 180 plus years old, plus minus. So, when we look at a life table is a static picture of life. So as it says, it's a table. Now, your life is a stream. So basically, we built an $8 trillion life and health insurance industry based on, I assume risk. And the way it was originally developed was, you will die, you will have an accident, you will get ill. And I know it doesn't sound beautiful, but that's the way it's constructed. Now, in my life, I, think there are movements in my life. They shape my life. And that's why I say a life table is a picture, and lifestyle navigation / microservices, they are mission critical, and they are like a movie. So it's like a stream where you go through your life. Now, if you think about that, number one, I get closer to the consumer's life, meaning I have more relevance. I create less churn rate for, my installed book of insurance policies. And I can sell, like George said before, add-on services, microservices, etc. So I think The life table is a great invention, don't get me wrong, but we need to get away from this family picture, which is black and white and 100 years old, over to something which is dynamic, which is mission critical, and which is part of the consumer's life. So I believe, number one, you will see great returns. Look at the WHO data from last week in their report. Number two, you will have consumers that will trust your brand because you were there for them, you were showing them the way. And I cannot even believe that insurance companies are sticking with the old model of, I'm just going to sell you a policy and you won't see me for the next 10 years. That for me is so outlived and stone age. And we need to get as fast as as possible as an insurance industry, away from that, stone age thinking over to something which is dynamic and related to the consumer's life.
Yes, that's a great example. I want to invite James and George on this topic as well, because you're each sort of working with the insurance industry, different sectors of the insurance industry, and trying to not just maximize efficiency, but lead. For example, I invite you, George, to think about this topic, and I know you've worked in terms of figuring out how to help insurers and platforms help their clients and to better manage risk through different techniques. How do you think about this issue of leading versus just business as usual?
I think a lot of it boils down to where the pressure point is. I feel that the insurance industry is fairly high on the inertia. So if the inertia is carrying itself forward, it's very hard to kind of come in front of it and say, well, things should be done differently because we've proven in the other markets that they could be a lot more efficient. It feels like when it becomes the pressure point, that's where stars starts to align and people say like, okay, let's say our loss ratio is increasing or our growth is plateauing. This is really what creates that opportunity for change. And then, hopefully at that point, this is where you can lead them in the correct direction so that they don't stumble at. And that's kind of what we find is that when we first came into outside of China, into wider Southeast Asia, into Japan, it was too new. I think it was at that point. So it was 2017. We started talking about embedded insurance. We started talking about using data to enrich the underwriting process. And it felt very foreign to most companies, most insurers and leaders that we talked to. But fast forward 4 or 5 years later, everybody's talking about it. Everybody's saying that they don't want to have a cookie cutter approach and kind of a templated. They want to have a much more dynamic approach to underwriting, to creating the profiles of the consumers and creating the products that are micro bundled specifically to the needs of those individuals, rather than just saying that it's a term insurance that everybody should buy. So I think that's been our journey when it comes to leading that change. We see ourselves less of a leaders, but more of as an enablers, and just kind of being ready to guide the industry where it needs to go.
Right, great. James, where do you see the great opportunities in terms of the insurance industry leading?
I think that that really, as the guys have already said, to me, a lot of this is about the services that are now available. Microservices at one end, slightly bigger ones at another. And it's all about promoting an ecosystem, a platform that can exist for them to flourish in. I mean, we've always been, we are long-term believers in ecosystems and platforms, ranging from financial services to communications. But within insurance, for example, one of the things that we've done in the past is help to create platforms where catastrophe models can actually come to the fore, even tiny little very specific ones that were really too small for general model suppliers to look at, doing very, very focused areas, now have a home where they can bring their solutions to the wider world. And to me, this is the fundamental part of it. It's to enable a myriad of services across the insurance spectrum to be made available so that the best possible care, the best possible customer care can be given by insurance companies out to their market, maybe even restoring themselves to being in the position of true trusted advisors. Are we looking at that coming?
So what do you see as the greatest inhibitor of that? What's the biggest challenge in terms of making that happen?
Honestly, I think a lot of it is data, is the idea that data is in some way secret, in some way protected because of regulation, and that if we develop a more open mind to this, as Peter was suggesting earlier, make sure, yes, that the regulatory requirements are adhered to strictly. That generates trust, that generates belief. But beyond that, use these things as a lever to actually promote service, to actually, frankly, do things better in a way that is better for the insurance company, better for the insured. After all, are we getting to the point with data now where can we actually reduce risk by the correct application? Can we even eliminate events taking place at all with the correct application data? I think that's where the real opportunity lies.
And that's what you're focused on, isn't it, Peter?
Absolutely. And if we kind of look around ourselves, I hope you will agree the progress we have made in diseases such as cancer over the last 10 years is only down to data. So basically, the coming together of data and advanced biology is probably, in my eyes, gonna, make certain diseases in 10 years look ridiculous. And you know what I mean by that we couldn't encipher them before. So I think with the whole DNA, strategy and computing power that we are seeing, we're going to take healthcare and insurance to completely new areas that none of us can imagine today. And we will soon have, I was watching from the World Economic Forum yesterday, a video where they showed a new chip that energizes itself from your sweat from your body. So you actually need zero battery. So imagine, I'm just going to have a patch on my body, and that patch is going to, do automated analysis of my glucose, of, my heart rate, etc. That goes directly in. It sends me a warning signal. It's going to be like, my car tells me, it actually happened this morning, you have to put me in the garage. There's something wrong with me. And why do I have a better service for my car than for myself? I love life. And I think most consumers, they want to have a good life. It's seldom you meet somebody who says, I want to be treated badly by my insurance.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's a great point to end on before I ask you for some closing comments, because I certainly intend to be here in 10 years, and I'm looking forward to those amazing capabilities that you just talked about, both in 10 years and on the path to that 10 years. So I thought we might, first, thank you all for a fascinating discussion. And I thought we might just sort of close to give you each an opportunity, maybe about a minute or so, for some last words to the audience on this key issue of data as a sustainable service. Peter, actually, let me start with you.
Thank you. First of all, I really enjoyed this great panel, and it's always an honor to have you all together here. And thank you for the people to listen. I would make mine very short and within the minute. I think insurance is all about understanding, about efficiency, and efficiency means you give me a better life, and sustainability is about efficiency, and actually having a happy life is about efficiency. If you come into your office and there's 7,000 emails and 2,000, kilos of paper laying around your office, you are not happy. The same is with your personal life. The same is with your health life. If you are overwhelmed and you cannot see through the forest of all these trees, guess what? You are not healthy. So the insurance job is to teach me, entertain me, and I mean the way entertain me, with healthy services that make me look after myself and stay healthy and happy. And that is super efficient and super, sustainable. So that's my 1 minute.
Absolutely. George?
Mine is the same comment. I really enjoyed our discussion today. Thank you very much. and this has been quite fun. So one of the things that happened yesterday was a journalist reached out to me, and she said that speaking to the regulators, she got a comment that regulators in Asia are looking at reducing the amount of data that's available to the insurers. And she asked me, "Would you think it's going to be a big risk for the innovation?" And my comment was exactly as we discussed before: is that data is important to innovation and is going to be a very important resource for insurance. I think it is about finding the right, proper way and the prudent way of using it to help further the good things that are being brought to the consumers. And as a result of it, I think we will be in an environment where we need to be a lot more agile and forward thinking of how do we use data and how do we actually use it in a good way to improve insurance for the world.
Great. Thank you. And James, let me give you the last word.
Well, thank you. And as it's been a great pleasure being with you today. It really has. I think that fundamentally, I'm a huge believer in ecosystems, a huge believer in platforms. And I believe that for insurance to really prosper, it has to use as much data as it can get its hands on in as effective way as possible from as wide a source as it can. And really, to do that, I'm afraid, being boring from an IT perspective, it has to be able to securely and preferably privately interconnect to each other to achieve all that, and it has to remember three things. There are three areas of IT that are vital for this. Firstly, an insurance company has a core, a digital core, where its basic operations take place. Secondly, it has to recognize that the digital edge is where everything is happening now. It's where data is being created, manipulated, etc. And finally, between those two, you have this connecting body, connecting tissue, Peter, if you like, from a medical perspective, which links these two things together, where you will find your ecosystems. They are the place where you will really add value. They are the place that are going to take your data, use it effectively, and allow you to serve your customers.
Absolutely. Well, let me just sort of take a quick moment to thank the panel for a fascinating conversation. I would invite the audience. Each of these gentlemen are doing really fascinating things in their realms. I invite you to sort of dig into their work more. We just caught a snippet of that. Feel free to follow with them directly. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, that was a great panel, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. So this panel, of course, on leveraging data as a sustainable service was an informative exchange of the leading edge thinking about the way data is used across our industry. And, it's always exciting to be able to bring together people with varying insights, experiences, and perspectives around a topic to explore how each one addresses the same challenges and what solutions have worked. This panel, of course, was led by futurist Chunka Moy and focused on how data is utilized to enhance our industry and lead to increased sustainability. Joining Chunka was George Kesselman, Chief Commercial Officer at ZA Tech and the head of the InsurTech Asia Association, speaking on the ecosystem of data. And Peter Onomus, founder and CEO of Dakadu, building a global platform for health scoring, as well as focusing on innovation around AI and making the world a more sustainable place. And James Maudsley of Equinix, a digital infrastructure company, bringing together digitally all aspects of the insurance industry to be more efficient and sustainable. The discussions circled around how data is critical to the industry and looked at emerging trends on using data and the larger context of sustainability and ESG. We learned that data has multiple and growing sources, and that growth has brought with it increasing cyber threats and regulatory implications, given the changing dynamics. The panel also discussed new forms of analysis, such as machine learning and AI, and the importance of addressing the entire ecosystem to be successful. The group explored how computer science can provide sustainability by consolidating data through standardization of collection and distribution of information, creating efficiency and lower costs, and noted that the product innovation can actually be driven by new uses of data, and it is an important enabler. Sustainability continues to grow in influence on insurance boards, and those who can better utilize data will be more impactful on bringing about change. And finally, the team touched upon ethics of data and the personalization of that data and how the industry balances the privacy versus the ability to predict and prevent future issues such as chronic diseases. Dakadu, Equinix, and ZA are clear leaders in their field, and this panel excitingly drew out the commonalities and perspectives that painted a useful picture on data and the insurance industry. Again, hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.